Happy to welcome to the show Steve Schmidt, who has a Substack and a YouTube channel called The Warning with Steve Schmidt. Great to see you, sir.
Great to see you all.
Yeah, of course. So Steve and I overlapped at MSNBC way back. So nice to be reconnected with you. And what came across my radar recently is you had a pretty scathing indictment of Joe and Mika over at Morning Joe and their decision to make the trek down to Mar-a-Lago and, as they described it, like restart relations with Donald Trump. And, you know, it was noteworthy to me in particular because you had been inside those circles. I was at MSNBC, never really invited to the Morning Joe Cool Kids table, but you were inside of those rooms and you did know Joe and Mika. So just give us your reaction to their trajectory here.
Well, let me just say, I think that we're in a very dangerous moment in the country. And the simplest way to appreciate what it is that they did, I think, is just to try to comprehend that 2 weeks ago, Donald Trump is out off Hitler, and the country is on the edge of catastrophe. And within days, the person who's making $10 million a year, sitting next to his wife who's making $10 million a year, controlling 4 hours of network television, goes to Mar-a-Lago and makes an act of capitulation on bended knee with head bowed that he condemned over and over and over and over and over and over again in the most strident terms. And when he did that, he undermined every person with clarity and conviction who has looked at this moment and not tried to sensationalize it, but to warn people about it. I agonized over my use of the word fascist because I know its meaning, and I know its history, and I know how loaded the term is and its implications applied to a major party candidate. But as I evaluated what Donald Trump said, what he threatened, what he promised, what his acolytes said, their veneration of Viktor Orban, the speeches that heralded replacement theory, the dogmas and the doctrines that were identical to things said 80 years ago, I said to myself, it's appropriate, and I called Trump a fascist. I wasn't alone. Timothy Snyder, the Yale historian and professor, did it. Other people did it. And I think that we did it with care and concern. And Joe Scarborough profoundly undermined that by making it seem cynical, pretend, concocted, political. And there's additional reporting, and I wrote about it today from Puck News, that the motivation, of course, for this is fear. They're terrified. And they went down to Mar-a-Lago and they did what they had to do to cover and protect their asses, which is not the thing to do if you hold a seat which you hold with importance in the hierarchy of American journalism. So Mika justified this by saying Zbigniew Brzezinski, a Pole, the Jimmy Carter era national security advisor, would have appreciated this because he was a diplomat and he would have processed this as a diplomatic act. Nonsense. He would have regarded it as a capitulant act. Mm-hmm. He would have seen it for exactly what it was. And it has created a profound crisis of credibility at MSNBC, which actually won't exist for very much longer at all as we enter into the early hours of the Trump administration.
Yeah.
So they didn't speak up in service of the truth, which would have been brave to sort of buck your audience to say something that's true. They spoke up in service of themselves My question for you is, did they have any sense that this would effectively nuke the remainder of their audience, which profoundly disagrees with the direction that they're now going?
Well, arrogance is a vice in these things because it distorts your perception, alters your reality. And I think that in their world, you heard them say it, that they've been heralded by their friends and phone calls from around the world, while 40% of their audience cratered. And the reality is that they work in the trust economy, and they obliterated the trust that they had with their audience, because at the core, the show has become married to power. Right. And this is so important to understand. Joe Biden's political advisor should not have been the MSNBC morning host. And his guests, like John Meacham, shouldn't have been the president's speechwriters while pretending to do analysis about the historical meaning of the president's speeches that he was writing. It's an enormous conflict of interest. And all of that accrues until this moment that Joe Scarborough looks into the camera regarding Joe Biden and he says, this is the best version of Joe Biden there's ever been, analytically, intellectually, and anybody who says otherwise, fuck you.
Yeah.
And in that instant, direct quote, he laid down the law that you stay on that side of the line if you want to come on my show, which in the eyes of the national media is a prestige show that makes all sorts of good things happen in their media careers.
That's right.
The problem with that is he is one of the architects of a political disaster in the country that's without precedent. And I say this to audiences all the time, and I don't care if you're a progressive, a conservative, right? This is aimed at functioning adults. Adult life requires you to hold multiple contradictory thoughts in your head at the same time in order to survive it. Donald Trump is the most prolific liar who has ever held a political office in the country, but a plurality of the country thinks he's the most honest candidate they've ever seen because of his authenticity. And so let's look at three things. Who is telling the truth as a practical matter about Biden's fitness? Would that have been Anita Dunn and Joe Scarborough, or would it have been Donald Trump? Who was telling the truth? Who was telling the truth about the condition of the border? Would that have been Anita Dunn and Joe Scarborough, or Donald Trump? And when it came to the economy, a lot of the media was celebrating Joe Biden as FDR 4 months into his term, when we were in an inflationary cycle that was really hurting working class people who remained completely invisible to people like Joe Scarborough, Mika, who in the end did not use this powerful platform to preach a gospel of idealism. They used it to promote their self-interest, their pet projects. It was cynical, and it's all come undone because the age of access media has ended. And another thing that's ended is this era where, as a trophy, billionaires would match their egos and their hopium and their platitudes with the purchase of a legacy news organization.
Yeah.
Running a newsroom now to require a lot of guts, a lot of integrity, a lot of fortitude. And so all these companies are going to be sold by all these people because, for the same reason that Comcast just did. The $164 million market capitalization company, that's cable assets are worth $7 billion. So the easiest decision a CEO has ever made in America is the decision that I'm not going to risk 90% of my company's assets for a small percentage of them. So it's gone. It's gone.
And this is what is to me troubling, Steve, is Joe and Mika don't stand alone. They're part of a trend of capitulation. You know, I think Bezos at the Washington Post deciding not to go forward with the Washington Post endorsement was an important symbol of that, but he was not the only one. You had Zuckerberg calling Trump. You had Sundar Pichai of Google calling Trump. You had Tim Cook over at Apple calling Trump. There's actually a whole Twitter drama unfolding right now where Elon Musk accused Jeff Bezos of saying negative things about Trump, and Bezos jumped on to be like, this isn't true at all. So, you know, I think you see this time around a level of capitulation to Trump and to his fascistic tendencies that you didn't see last time. And you see it also somewhat in the Democratic Party. Right. I mean, someone like Jared Polis coming out and being like, oh, actually, maybe RFK Jr. is going to be great at HHS. And Cory Booker sounding very similar notes. It's like, what is going on here, guys? Like, you've lost your minds, and it's quite obvious and apparent what's going on.
When you look at this moment, you have to look back at history to appreciate the model, and the model is the most extreme one because it's the most clarifying. So when Hitler came to power in Germany, and in the process of becoming a dictator, there were a couple of German institutions that were the most skeptical of the Nazis and opposed to it. And one of those institutions was the German military. They did not like the Nazis. The officer class of the German military was the German aristocracy. It was Prussian. They disdained what they called the Bohemian corporal. Guess who and what was the first institution in Germany to volunteer to replace the oath to the German Constitution with the personal oath of loyalty to Hitler? The military. So fear produces nothing good. Produces panic. Panic produces a loss of judgment, creates rash actions. It makes people do things that, absent the fear, that they would never, ever, ever do. So all of these people are doing precisely what you would expect them to do, which is to line up, to kiss the ring, to stay in line, to maintain their license to operate. And if you're a CEO of some of these companies, that license to operate means making astounding amounts of money a year. Now, you look at the CEOs of some of the media companies, like a David Zaslav, where the business model is utterly preposterous. It's all a Ponzi scheme. It is a shuffling of the debt card. They don't make money, so the vulnerability is even greater.
Right.
You stay in line, you get to keep making $65 million a year, David Zaslav, even though your company loses money and your ratings are shrinking. And so capitulant acts should be observed and seen. Now, this is a moment where there should be deep introspection and reflection inside the Democratic Party, because they just lost a race to Donald Trump. And so you would think it would beggar the question, what is it about us that the American people find so alarming and out of touch about that they vote for this guy? Put that aside. You have some of the most unfit people that have been ever nominated to a position of public trust. And I mean unfit. Unfit to run a petting zoo. Pete Hegseth just read the alleged rape criminal report, cannot be the Secretary of Defense. Cannot. Robert F. Kennedy just read the report about the 23-year-old babysitter that he couldn't keep his hands off of.
By the way, he doesn't even deny that.
No,
right.
no.
My co-host interviewed him, and he didn't even deny it.
And he's a guy that just leaves a wake of devastation and pain in wherever he goes. The nominee for the National Intelligence Director is a legitimate member of a cult. It's a yoga cult that holds that the practice of that specific yoga gives them the ability to see deeper truth in all things. She's unfit to be the director of national intelligence because she can't distinguish what's real and what's not. And she's easily manipulated by the propaganda of foreign intelligence services, which she goes on and repeats on Fox News. Clinically, Kristi Noem is a sadist, confessed by her own hands, who gave Donald Trump a replica of Mount Rushmore with his head added onto it, who's going to take command of America's 18 three-lettered domestic security agencies. All of these people, plus Matt Gaetz, are a profound threat to American liberty. It's not possible for these proverbial drunks to drive around our proverbial community in a giant tractor trailer, high as fuck, all day, every day, and not hit anything.
Yeah, that's right.
And so we're going to see the military deployed into the street, across the country. We're going to see an abuse of civil rights and civil liberties that is going to be mind-boggling. We're going to see the wholesale hollowing out of the civil service, sledgehammering of vital institutions, and it's going to be a very, very rough time. And what the moment will require is truth tellers who are tough, people who will not bend, will not back up, and it will mean that civil society in its aggregate has to stand up. And people as Americans have to say no. For example, if you're a kid, a high school student in Oklahoma, when the nutter who is the state superintendent tries to impose state-ordered prayer, stand up, walk out into the hallway, organize it with all of your student friends, before school, after school, and paralyze your school. You've already had enough education stolen from you during COVID. So if they want to impose this farce on you, when the administrators of your school are ready to get to the business of teaching, make yourself available to learn and sit back down in your seat. But until then, assert your constitutional right to not be programmed and defy what is an illegal and immoral and political assault on Americanism. Read about civil disobedience. Read the letter from the Birmingham jail. People all across this country, ordinary people, are going to be called to stand up in this moment, because don't look to the Joe and Mikas of the world.
That's right.
They don't care about you, and they're not on your side.
So when all is said and done, the final margin is ultimately going to be about 1.5 percentage points, which is the smallest popular vote margin since George Bush in 2000. But what I see is a lot of people acting like this is the mandate of all mandates, and Trump is FDR after winning his fourth election. You're already seeing capitulation to elements of Trumpism, as you guys both pointed out. My question for you is, so we haven't gone down that rabbit hole. We're not capitulating to Trump in any way, shape, or form. And as MSNBC's ratings implode, our ratings go up. Our numbers go up. Our subscribers go up. Your subscribers go up. So are they just fundamentally miscalculating? And do they not understand there is no market for half Trumpism right now. The people feel, in my case in particular, I would say, I'm even more reinvigorated to fight back even than I was in 2016. And it looks like there's a fundamental misreading of the room that's happening among MSNBC hosts.
74 million people at least voted for Kamala Harris the last time I looked. This is so important what you just said. And I just want to say this slowly for everybody who can see me, hear me, and get people ready to repeat it. He did not win a majority. He won a plurality. He won under 50% of the country. So what that means is the core issue of whether we want to live in the MAGA-tocracy remains undecided. By the thinnest of wafers, Trump has become president after 3 elections in which he won narrowly, lost one narrowly, and has won again narrowly. And the idea that what was decided in this election is the obliteration of Americanism, the empowering of a Caesar, the destruction of the checks and balances through recess appointments of a Star Wars clown car bar scene, is rejected by most people. And when they look at these corporate media stations, what they see is performative cynicism. So it's not true of everybody. I think Rachel Maddow has a lot of integrity. My friend Nicole Wallace, I think, is a titan of integrity, and I think produces a great show. You know, we're talking about politics today, but we haven't talked about policy. We haven't talked about issues. We haven't talked about ideology. What we share in common is not necessarily those things, but it's a sense of character that I'm going to tell you the truth. And I'm going to tell you what I believe. And I'm not going to pull punches. If I tell you that Donald Trump is a fascist, I'm going to say it because I believe it, I mean it, and I can back it up. And so you are seeing this cratering because what the business model is about the marriage of information to power and its broadcast. A great example of that is Jen Psaki. So this is supposed to be a news organization, right? You're the White House press secretary. And while you have that job, you're negotiating with the news organization, and you will literally drive out of the White House to the set of your new show in the corporate media to echo the talking points that you were previously speaking behind the blue podium in the press briefing room on what's supposed to be an American independent journalism at a time where trust is collapsing in every institution in the country. And holy shit, like, you can't make it up. Yeah. And that model has collapsed because the displacements of power and information have empowered and flattened the field where people with conviction have the ability really in an insurgent manner to displace incumbency. And you will see more and more of that. Journalism isn't dead in America. Corporate accommodationist access journalism is dead. The leader of the AP News Bureau, right, the Associated Press News Bureau, writes a hagiography of Jill Biden, right, for the purpose of going to book parties together, being in business together. What's the business? It's the access business. And this is a moment where everywhere you look, powerful people in this country are doing shit they ought not to be doing that harms ordinary people. And it ought to be reported on, it ought to be printed, it ought to be talked about fearlessly, and these people ought to be confronted because that information is the key to agency in a democracy because the moment will come when we have a chance to say enough.
Guys, this is only a small piece of a much longer interview with Steve Schmidt. He absolutely goes nuclear on MSNBC hosts who are former friends of his. Definitely sign up on Substack below and enjoy.